Welcome, everybody. I just want to say a couple words about logistics. We are going to have this session video recorded, but I'm going to ask our editor to edit this part out. I want to welcome everyone here. We're so glad that you came. We are expecting some more folks, so I appreciate folks who were willing to come sit on this side of the table. We hopefully other folks will kind of filter in. You'll go to the back door. Great, thanks, welcome. So, would you mind propping that back again? They've changed the locks on these doors, and you used to be able to unlock them and leave them unlocked, and now you can't. So it's very challenging to have events in here now. Okay, my apologies. So what we'll do first is we'll have the panel discussion. I have some of the questions that you all shared as part of the registration process, and I've shared those with our panelists today. So we'll start with those kind of common questions that it seemed like lots of folks wanted answered, and then we'll move to a more open kind of Q&A, but I will stop periodically and ask if there are kind of follow-up questions or if anybody wants to jump in and ask about something that's been brought up recently. And we will go till maybe about 4:15, at which point I'll end the formal conversation and open things up for one-on-one kinds of conversations in case you want to connect with folks while they're here. Okay? Great, so that's the plan for today. All right, so now we begin rolling. Welcome, everyone. My name is Melissa Bostrom. I'm Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event as part of the Academic Job Search Series, which is co-sponsored with the Duke Career Center and the Office of Postdoctoral Services. Today's panel discussion is the second in a series of 3. Today's focus is on the interviewing process for faculty positions. We're really delighted to welcome 4 expert panelists today. And let me start to your farthest left, Professor John Aldrich, who is Professor of Political Science here at Duke University, and he received his PhD from the University of Rochester in Political Science. Then to his left is Professor Collie Fulford, who is Associate Professor of English at NC Central University, and she received her PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in English, focusing on composition and rhetoric. And then to her left is Professor Mina Garcia, who is Associate Professor of Spanish at Elon University, and she received her PhD from Duke in Romance Studies, and because that wasn't enough, another PhD from the Universidad de Malaga. And then finally, to my immediate right is Professor Linda Rupert, who is Associate Professor of History at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and she's also a Duke PhD from History. So we're so pleased to welcome all of our panel. What I'd like to do, panelists, is kind of start with the first question. I'm going to ask if John could start the first question, and just so everybody in the room knows what the first question is, it's just describe the balance of faculty responsibilities at your institution and what you're looking for in candidates. I think that will kind of ground our conversation then about what you look for in an interview process in terms of making assessments and evaluations of candidates.
So I presume that I'm here to represent the R1, as they're known, Research 1 universities, in this specific regard. So research is a high priority for hiring, and then for every decision that comes afterwards. R1 universities cover, it may not seem like it, but they actually cover a range. There is a range, and Duke is at the more of a teaching along with research, and then other universities. So if you were lucky enough to get an interview at Ivy League University X, teaching is something that they may have to do. They may tell you you really ought to do some. So for the set of R1 universities, this is where your research profile will be prominent. At Duke, we would also be really very interested not just making polite conversation, but to find out about your teaching interests, your understanding of how you would try to approach students. And at Duke, one of the things that I tell people coming to think about it as an undergraduate is this is a place to come where you can actually learn from researching faculty. Okay? So that makes us a little bit different. I taught 2 other R1 universities that were both land-grant universities, Michigan State University and University of Minnesota. And there, the service component is a genuine, serious commitment. The Moral Land Grant Act of 180 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever it is makes a difference. And even at UNC, even though it's not the land grant university, there is some still commitment to service to the community. When we think of service to the department, to the university, to the discipline. But if you're going to be interviewing at other important R1 universities that are state universities, commitment to the service to the state is also something that they will look at. But first and foremost will come your research profile, and so the interview and the job talk presentation will set the tone for a lot of the rest to come. I'll turn it to other people.
I'm here representing public minority serving institutions. NCCU is a historically black institution, over 100 years old, and I think that the balance literally, I looked up what the balance is on my annual review. 60% is teaching, is what where our faculty in our department are evaluated on. 40% is divided at the discretion of the faculty member between scholarship and service. When you are coming into the institution, however, if you're looking for positions at minority serving institutions, you just kind of quietly expect that service is going to take a good bit of your energy, but you still want to have a profile as a scholar. That's really important. The prestige of being able to produce scholarship that supports the HBCU mission is pretty good. It's valuable to the faculty looking at the materials. But teaching really is the heart and soul of it. So looking at incoming junior faculty, we look for people who, what means a good fit for the institution is, I'm clearly not black, and I know that choosing to apply for positions in minority serving institutions means choosing to become more culturally aware than you might have been raised, or that your PhD program prepared you to be, but just choosing to take on kind of building your cultural knowledge through any means necessary, right? So people will be looking for folks who can answer hard questions about what would you do for our students. And by our students, they'll mean whatever the spectrum is of the students at that minority serving institution, right? So think about that as you're applying for different kinds of positions. It's like, oh, are you attracted to institutions for whom diversity or for whom special populations, distinct from America's kind of white population, is calling to you for some kind of reason? Then that can be a powerful thing to be able to come on the market with that knowledge about yourself that helps you build the knowledge towards applying for those kind of positions. Again, if teaching is important and scholarship that could be shared with students is important. So scholarship that scholarship that brings on undergraduates into that. If you can imagine your scholarship, I know dissertations are solo projects, right? But if you can imagine ways that your scholarship might be relevant to undergraduates, might be something, a project you could build into the future ongoing that you bring them on, that really works well in minority serving institutions.
Yeah, I guess I'm here to represent liberal arts colleges and universities. I will say that I share a lot of what colleague has already referred to. My institution refers to itself as a teaching institution. And in the 12, this is my 13th year there. In these years, I have seen a transformation in what that means. So when I started 13 years ago, teaching was number one, still is, but I'm not sure where the other ones fall now. I think, and this is my personal opinion about this, that Elon is going through a teenage crisis, evolution, like we don't know who we are, but we are not where we used to be. So we are kind of defining a little bit. So it used to be that teaching and teaching alone will grant you promotion and all these things. Now, teaching still has to be excellent, right? Still has to be number one. And Elon has a lot of different resources to make your teaching improve. We have a department service, I guess, that is dedicated to the advancement of teaching and learning. There's all kinds of emphasis on peer teaching and peer mentoring and all these kinds of things. So teaching is still number one, but I feel like more and more scholarship and service are taking more and more of our time. And I'm not sure at the end, when you go out for promotion, how that is valued. And what I would love to have a 60-40 system, but we don't have it. So at the moment, I am in a committee actually looking at this culture of busyness. It looks like you have to be, busy all the time. And the cool thing to say when you come back from fall break, which is now for me, is like, oh, it's so busy, So it's like this culture of keep throwing things on top of you. And I'm not sure that that is good for anybody's level of anxiety. So, we're starting to look at these kinds of things, kind of starting to create a little bit of a balance, if that is achievable. Because when we go out for promotion, for example, it's not like, for example, at Duke, that you have to have a book, and that is kind of like opening your doors for promotion. For us, it's an ongoing scholarly agenda, whatever that means, right? We don't know what that means. We don't know if those are 3 or 2 or 5 or 5 and a book, right? We don't, articles, I mean. So we don't know. Same thing with committees, belonging to different committees. It used to be that to go, that it was not required for incoming faculty to participate in any committees. And then from then you started moving up into, department committees and the university committees and blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure that that's the case any longer. And so it's the piling on effect. And I think we're moving a little bit from being intentional in everything that we do, and I think we're trying to go back to that. So we can talk about that more later. Yeah.
So I'm representing a mid-level state institution, and our institution has certainly changed dramatically since I arrived there in fall 2006. In some ways, we're still digging out of the tremendous changes that happened between 2008 and 2010. And also, as a state institution, we are very dependent on state legislature budgets. And the details of UNCG might be different than another state institution you're applying for, but certainly if you're applying to a university, you should take into account, is it private, is it state? Our demographics have changed dramatically. We are now actually officially a minority serving institution as well. And I think across the board, regardless of department, there is a great interest and commitment to increasing our diversity. But we see diversity in writ large. It certainly refers to race, ethnicity. It also refers to gender and sexuality. But it also, in our case, we see a lot of students, many more students who are first generation college, who are of immigrant backgrounds, whose family's legal status might be a little bit something that we don't inquire about too much for obvious reasons. We have a lot of vets. And so diversity is not necessarily something that we expect walking in and looking at your face, we say, oh, you can check the diversity box. We want to know what is your commitment to the type of students that we have and the variety of students that we have. I'm in the history department. Our teaching load is 2-3. Across the humanities, depending on how large the graduate programs are, some of our humanities departments are 2-2 teaching load, meaning 2 courses in the fall, 2 courses in the spring, right? Some of them are 3-3. So that will vary a lot. On paper, our requirements for doing our jobs is 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service. We do a lot more service. And I think probably almost everyone does a lot more service than that. We're not able to control the number of committees the university has, the number of things our department needs to do. So certainly one of the things we're looking for in someone is someone who can recognize that research, teaching, and service are all important. I think sometimes there's the expectation, oh, at a teaching heavy school or at a non-R1 school, you don't care so much about research. Oh, look at the CVs of my colleagues in any department in the humanities or any department. My colleagues have incredible research agendas, but we're also looking for someone who is able to learn how to teach the students we have. We don't necessarily expect that people come in to hit the ground running, but aware of the kinds of students we have and the challenges that we have. And also someone who is going to be collegial and willing and able to pitch in the various service requirements we have. In terms of what is a good fit, I would say that's going to depend on the job that's offered. And I'm going to say this probably several times today. Really read the job ad and get on the university website and on the department's website and spend some time really learning the details.
Thank you all for that really thorough grounding in your institutions. And now I want to invite you to step back, from representing your entire institution and feel free to represent yourself and maybe even your discipline too. Because I understand that sometimes, things can be discipline by discipline. And let's speak a little bit to, in your discipline, what makes for a good first round interview? How should candidates be preparing for whatever that first round interview is? They used to be conference interviews. I think they're moving towards Skype interviews. They may have even taken on some different shapes in other disciplines, and I welcome that conversation too. But how do people prepare for whatever that first round interview is? And maybe I could start with Collie this time.
Well, I'm going to pick up where Linda left off because absolutely the preparation has to be learn about the institution by, the website's the first way. If it seems that there's an invitation on there to add, contact one of the members who posted the ad, contact them. Ask the questions that you have that seem fair to ask, right? If you're not sure if they're fair to ask them anyway, but they won't answer if they're not. Yeah, so that's a great way to prepare. Know 2 things that you believe would make you an excellent fit for the job, and you won't know that unless you know something about the institution first. You know yourself pretty well. And be ready to weave those responses into the interview, even if you're not asked directly about them. Kind of stand in a position of confidence, even if you don't feel confident. Borrow that. Know a lot. Know the size, the mission, the student demographics. Know the prominent programs, especially those related to the department you're interested in entering. Find ways to soothe your own nerves. If you can, if it seems appropriate, get the names of the committee members in advance so you know whether they're in your field of specialty or not. That will help you with the language that you use to describe your projects.
How would you get that information? What would be an appropriate way to figure out who's on the committee?
If they first, the chair will contact you and say, would you be willing to share the committee members' names?
Okay, just
Nina?
We do Skype interviews, and I would say, like they both have said before, do your homework. So study the website, study the program, study the department. If you see any programs that you might be interested in, like American Studies might cover, anything like that might be of interest to your discipline, just try to establish connections with that, make it so that they can see that you already see yourself there, right? Something important, I think, would be to be able to defend and discuss any point of your CV. I have had too many interviews. I think one is too many, right? Interviews in which you ask something and they just draw a blank. It's like, it's in your CV. Or in what journal did you publish this article? I remember this very unfortunate interview that we had one time in which one of the members of the committee just looked at the name of an article and just was genuinely interested in the topic and asked a question. And that article was never published, even though it was there as if it was. And so, you know, that is a big red flag, you know, if you're not honest in the presentation, in the things that you're presenting, the documents that you're presenting. So if you can defend it and you can discuss it, just don't include it. I mean, I'm sure you have wonderful things that to include and to talk about, so just don't include that one piece, because it just gives a really bad, you know, just flavor in your mouth after that. I would think, and this sounds really stupid, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I would say people on Skype interviews sometimes don't take it as seriously as if they are in an in-person interview, and they don't dress appropriately, for example. Or they don't make sure that the background where they're sitting in front of is something that they want their employers to see. I don't know, you may have there something, I don't know, posters of your kids, I don't know, whatever, that you don't necessarily want to present. You know, make sure that you do a mock Skype interview with somebody. You know, have a friend say, how do I look? Is this a good light? Is this not a good light? Do I have to turn the blind? You know, the blind needs to be down, the light has to be off, you know, whatever you need. But you need to have all of those things in mind because you can control it, right? And you don't have to, if you are in a hotel interview somewhere, you can control most of those things. But if they are calling you at home or in your office, you can. So why not just invest a little bit of time in those kinds of things? But I would say do your homework, study your CV, and make sure that your presentation is what you want.
I would echo all of this. I think all of these are great suggestions. I do think with the Skype interview, we've got the balance of it can be more comfortable and that should work to your advantage, but do remember that it is still a professional setting, right? And I totally echo the suggestion that you don't have to do a full-blown Skype interview, but Skype with a friend and say, you know, I did that with somebody and the whole time I was going like this. And she said, you know, you're making me seasick. So then I learned that I needed to just not move. But the advantage of a Skype interview as compared to a hotel interview is you can have a few comfortable things of yours that are out of sight of the other person, of the people interviewing you, but that you can kind of do. You can have on your bunny slippers, but you should look very nice from here to here. You know, it kind of reminds me, we do both written and oral comps with our PhD students. And I always tell my students, that we do writtens first and then orals. And I always say the first thing I'm going to do in the oral comps after the writtens is say, all right, what do you wish you'd said in the writtens? I know you've been thinking about it ever since the writtens. So think of the Skype interview as how can you best showcase and present the best face of yourself? What do you want to emphasize? And do ask some questions. There will be a time for questions.
So, yeah, may just follow, I agree with everything. Asking questions, actually ask questions that would be related to the intellectual mission of and not like, you know, oh, you have insurance of this kind, and, right, you know, so remember this is a professional relationship. The second thing that I can add, I think that it's a point of emphasis, there's been sort of hints about this, but who is it that's interviewing you in this setting? When it's, you know, from my point of view, this is usually the search committee going from we call it the long short list or the short list down to the 3 or so people that we bring in for on-site interviews. So that means you're talking with the committee, which will have a disproportionate representation of people in your field. So they're still trying to make a judgment of whether you represent their field, their interests well, right? As opposed to when you get on campus, when the people who work in close areas that are close to yours have already made a judgment that you're at least one of the top 3. You'll be talking to everybody else in the department, and so you'll be talking about it's not specialists anymore. You're trying to reach a broader audience. Here, you're still trying to indicate that you're the best person in American politics or international relations and political theory or whatever it is in my discipline and whatever it would be in yours, you're the kind of person that they would want to put forward to say, this is the person I'd like to have as my colleague, one of the three at least.
Thank you all for that. So I think some people already kind of addressed the next question, panelists, on your sheet, but I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to answer that if you wanted to, and that is, is there anything in particular that helps a candidate stand out at that kind of first round interview stage, or any kind of red flags that you'd want to surface for our audience today? Anything else that you want to say about that?
I would say to me the biggest red flag is if you really haven't done your homework about the institution, the department, and the job ad. Not only our department, I don't know a department at our university that doesn't have a long time where the department decides the wording of the job ad. So you should really make sure you pay attention to that. That would be the big red flag.
I'm going to offer some red flags. There's two ends of the affect spectrum that you can avoid. One is overly bouncy and hyped up, and the other one is monotonous with low energy. And but I think be comfortable that there is room in between to personalize this. Not everybody has to be a cheerleader in order to be a really valuable colleague and a valuable teacher. So that's something. I think it's one other. That's notes to help myself remember. Ignorance about the institution and the department stands out as a red flag, and this can still happen in a Skype interview situation, and it really surprises my colleagues. So if you seem to be operating off just a basic Googled definition of what an HBCU is or an MSI is, then it's clear, that it's a temporary knowledge, it's not deep knowledge. So if you're lacking a personal connection to the mission, it comes through on the Skype interview.
And I would say, to add to that, be ready to ask questions that are not necessarily on the website. So it shows that you have studied the website and that you're ready to move deeper, right? That you're really asking those things that the website doesn't answer, right? So you're ready to dig deeper than that. And yeah.
I just add that, remember before the interview, remember you could talk to your advisors and so on and say, what do you know about this department?
Yeah.
That kind of position to help get the prep.
A quick question about knowing your CV and kind of where you want the emphasis to fall in the interview. And I know that there won't be a hard rule for this, but to what extent do you want to kind of show the coherence of what you're talking about and the way you're answering questions with what's seen on the CV in relation to kind of adding to what you've already shown them, right? Because the interview is also the opportunity to show them what you haven't shown them yet, right? So what, I totally understand, you need to know what's on the CV and be ready to talk about it, but how interested are you in kind of using the interview to build on that to get a more three-dimensional picture?
I think one of the things that you're valuing in the interview is potential, right? I think the CV is only one part of that potential, and of course that's what the interview is about, right? Trying to see how flexible you are in the setting, and it would be different for our institutions, right? And it would be different within my institutions in different programs and in different departments, right? So how flexible, how ready are you to teach, for example, GST core, so global studies, right? Coming from your background in Latin American studies, will you be able to stretch yourself to do that? You haven't done it, so it's not on your CV. But that's my job as an interviewer, is to see to imagine how I will place you, right? Or to imagine how I will, what kind of connections you could make Yeah, I think that's part of it, yeah, you should be.
I think that's a really good example, because we don't expect ABDs or newly minted PhDs to have a lot of teaching experience. And yet we realize that there's potential there. So if there's a disjuncture between what you can put on your CV in terms of teaching and the job ad, but you can make a compelling case as to, hey, I see you're interested in this kind of teaching, or I see your department doesn't offer these courses that are related to the job ad. I've been thinking about that, and oh, I have a draft syllabus, you know, that kind of thing, or even if you don't have a draft syllabus, I'd like to talk more about that. How do you envision these courses? That's a great time to ask questions as well as volunteer.
Like at Duke, for example, I was very lucky to be able to propose 2 classes of my own and teach them. So I had syllabi that I had already taught, and so that is a great way to show them your range and to show something that you can bring to the department that they might not have, and connections to other people in the department, right, who might be doing the same thing in a different language, or who might be doing something similar. So, yeah.
When they're talking about the Skype interview rather than the in-person interview, remember the Skype interview is a relatively contained time period, and so you want to make sure you present your best case, not the hopeful case. And so I would be a little bit, stay a little closer to whatever your best case is, presumably related to your dissertation and the courses that would flow out of that, those 2 sets of things. A little bit closer to make sure that gets across. When you have half-hour interviews with all the faculty and you go out to dinner and those sorts of things, you have time to be more expansive. And that's where you can show a curious mind and caring about students or those sorts of things.
Except at a high teaching institution like this, and the teaching experience is a non-negotiable. You have to have it.
Right.
Yeah.
And we asked about that in the Skype interview.
Sure.
Yeah.
But that interview is an occasion for you to take the generic representation of your awesomeness on paper and to begin that imaginative process of working with the interviewing committee to see, well, what does this mean in this institution?
Right.
And it's an interview, but it's also a conversation, you know?
And you're also interviewing them. So that's the part where you ask questions, right? So it's a double interview as well. And you also want to find out stuff that you might not have answers from just looking at the website.
Can I ask you a question about asking the questions? I mean, I'm just aware that it's still an interview, so you're still being evaluated on questions you ask them, sort of.
Sure.
So it's not the place to ask how much do you really like working? You're still trying to get to the point of being offered the job, and then you can later ask those. So it's a place to show that you've been thoughtful, and I mean it can be your own legitimate question, but there are limits to what's appropriate, I guess, and I guess. I'm not formulating a question well, but that what are examples of kinds of questions people ask at that stage that are appropriate questions that reflect well on them? I guess I'm a little puzzled as to how you bound what you really want to ask versus what's appropriate for the space.
It seems to me that that's hard to answer in the abstract. When you're invited for a Skype interview for a particular department, for a particular job, then you look at the job ad, you look at the department's website, you look at the university website. Surely you have some questions. And of course, you're going to have questions about salary and that are not appropriate, but what are your professional questions about, I see Dr. Krieger teaches this course on Africa regularly. Are you looking for someone else who could also teach Africa courses, or is that pretty much covered? Or it's hard to come up with specific questions, but you will have them.
Okay. Yeah.
You will have them.
Before we leave the first round interview, are there other questions or questions about questions?
So one more question. So apart from the red flags and what not to do, do you have any examples of ways in which certain interviewees distinguish themselves very positively, left a very good impression?
The overachievers, huh? So Yes, and I didn't do this, right? And it would not have been appropriate for me to have done this 13 years ago. But I see this as more and more, and it's about 5-year plan, mission statement, university priorities, those kinds of documents that I had no idea existed when I went in the market, right? But this is 13 years ago. But I see those discussed more and more. And you need to, I think now, if you're going for the Overachiever Prize Award, you need to look at these kinds of things to see trajectory, to see where they see themselves in 5 years, right? And if that is something that you would like to be a part of, right? So yeah, there's, every department has 5-year plans, every school has 5-year plans, every university has mission statements, I think all departments and schools also. Yeah, all of those kinds of documents. They're all on the website, they're not hidden anywhere.
I would slightly disagree with that.
Okay.
And I'm not averse to, and my colleagues and I are not averse to people bringing that up, but we're hiring for a job.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you distinguish yourself? We're not looking for somebody who's like, gonna get up and sing an aria. We're looking for somebody who fits the job, who has the qualifications. So I think it's a matter of just, be your best with the job description and your qualifications. We're not looking for somebody who's gonna do something out of the ordinary or amazing. And we certainly, in the Skype interview, at least where we only have 15 minutes, we really don't want to be talking about the university's vision or the department's. We want to be talking about your qualifications. But it might differ from place to
One thing too is, one thing you might be able to ask about, certainly on the interview, and I think in the Skype interview, would be sort of where does the department you're being interviewed about, where do they fit into the college or the university's plan? So political science at NC State University has a couple of very good scholars, but they are a service to the rest of the university, as opposed to at, let's say, UNC, where they're a central part of the mission and one of the leading departments. So knowing whether you're helping train, the STEM people have a well-rounded education, or you're fully political science all the way, is a good thing to know about and quite reasonable to ask. Because you're a professional trying to find a place where you can express your professional life, playing your professional life, and knowing where the department fits within the university or college's priorities is a perfectly reasonable thing.
This question might be very different depending on the institution or even the field. But I'm wondering if there's any standard time period between finding out that you're going to have an interview and the Skype interview itself. And then also how this works from the hiring committee's standpoint. If the committee is sitting in a room for 8 hours a day and interviewing person after person and discussing briefly in between, how does that work, just so we could get an idea of what your stamina is like?
Basically,
You don't want to know. You don't want to know.
We're fitting it around our teaching schedules. We're trying to get 5 people in the room at the same time who have very complex schedules. And so no, it's not going to be an 8-hour day of just meeting people online. It's probably maybe the 1 or 2, maybe 3 people at the same day, but not likely. Probably you're the only one in the day.
I have a very different answer from that. We do it on reading day, and we do 6 hours of that, like, boom,
Wow,
yeah,
that's efficient.
yeah, we do that, yeah.
In terms of the schedule of getting to the next stage, that's going to depend on a lot of moving factors that are outside of our control. At certain levels in the process, we need the dean's approval, and we don't ask the dean how long that is going to take, because the dean has to approve every single search that the entire college is doing at certain stages. So there are a lot of others. Sometimes somebody gets ill. There's any one of a number of factors. Sometimes there are problems with glitches with reserving the room where the Skype interviews have to take place, so there can be a series of things.
In political science, this is a disciplinary thing rather than a type of university. Our annual meetings have to come, they don't happen to come, they're planned obviously, but they're, until this coming year, they were always held on Labor Day weekend. So it's right at the beginning of the school year, so a lot of places, a lot of small liberal arts colleges, for example, use the time at the meetings kind of in lieu of the Skype. Quite often. And so they do have the 8 hours, somebody gets to get a hotel suite because they have to have a room to meet in, and it just keeps going. So you do get fatigue on the part of the, eyes crossed, people's heads kind of hit the table, and it's not necessarily you at all.
This is not very encouraging, but we used to do that. We used to do M&A. And
Yes.
so we used to go to whatever place and get a suite and do many interviews in a day. And for the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years, we just stay on campus and do Skype. But we do one day, we do the whole thing.
You see why political science is a bad idea.
But on the other hand, for a given job, there can be between 100 and 200 applications. So by the time we get down to the Skype interviews, we are super, super excited.
Yeah.
And all of us are in that room just really charged, and could this be the one? And we always want to hire more people than we can. I mean,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
There's no one reason why someone doesn't get hired.
Yeah.
There's fabulous candidates out
That is some great context. I do want to keep us moving
Yeah.
to the next round of the interview process, which is the on-site interview, usually the short list. Often 3 candidates is kind of the magical number. And maybe starting with Mina this time, talk to us about what that campus visit entails. Is it a teaching demonstration on your campus? Is it a research presentation? Is it some combination of the two? And how should candidates prepare for that kind of high stakes, interactive portion of the campus visit?
In my university, it's both. So yeah, we have the worst of both worlds. We have a teaching demo and we have a job talk. That is research. When we do on-campus interviews, we have 3. If one of them is local, we have 4. I was a cheap date because I was local, and so they didn't have to fly me in or get me a hotel or anything like that, which means I had to do the entire thing in one day, which is tiring. It's a lot because you start breakfast with somebody, interview with the dean, blah blah blah, teaching demo, lunch with students, job talk, meet HR, meet with American Studies probably, meet with international office, then dinner with the committee, and I think that was about that. So it's exhausting. When people come from other places, we normally have a day and a half, right? So you normally do some in the afternoon when they arrive, and they have dinner so they meet maybe with the dean and with somebody, and then they have dinner with half of the committee, and then they have a full day, and then they have dinner with the other half of the committee or with some of the faculty that want to. So it's a little bit more reasonable. With one day is a lot, and yeah. And I had a couple of them cancel in the middle of the day because it started snowing, and so they closed the school. So I had to drive back home and start over again the next day. So I mean, all kinds of things can happen, but it's a full day. Yeah.
Some of us are very perplexed that the job hiring season in academia is in the winter months.
Yeah.
Some of us really don't get that. In our university, it depends on the department. You will have a research element and a teaching element, but whether it's a full-blown teaching demo or some other thing depends. In our department, it's a job talk, and then a period after the job talk where you switch to teaching mode, and you don't give a teaching demo, but you talk about your teaching. At UNCG, however, unlike your situation, we are required to have the exact same kind of format regardless of where you're from. So the times we brought somebody local, They still come an evening before, have dinner, and then they spend the night. They have a full day of things, spend the night, have a half day, and then leave. This is a great time, if you're invited to a campus visit, to do extra research about beyond the department and make requests. I would love to meet with someone in women and gender studies. I would like to meet with the digital people. You know, this is the time that you can request and say, these are some things that I'm interested in.
So what you should have figured out by now is that it's like really demanding.
Exhausting.
Let's see, two things I want to say. That you will meet with a dean, maybe multiple outside the department administrators. I still have no idea what to do with those things. Don't worry about them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Don't worry about them. And don't try to be, you know, a jerkhead or anything. Don't fret about that, you know. Worry about the faculty in the department. In a place like Duke, you'll meet with graduate students, having just read something you put out. So and we take those responses seriously and include it in our consideration as the full faculty. Every time you're with somebody, they have an opportunity to form an impression. I know that's the case. It's really hard. I don't act like it now, but I was painfully shy until I was in my 40s or 50s.
High five.
Yes.
But okay, so the second thing I wanted to emphasize was that when you're giving your talk, whether it's your job talk or a class presentation, or in some cases both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially job talk, you know this material in a way that nobody else does. The downside of that is that you think it's important and nobody else necessarily does, right? And you know it, right? You're talking to people who don't know your field. The experts in your field were probably on the committee and they've already decided you're one of the top 3. You're now talking to everybody else who is interested in what you would be like to have you as one of their colleagues.
Right.
Somebody they interact with on a day-to-day basis for years, potentially, or many, many years, you hope. So they want to know that you're someone who's interested, will do the job, but is just going to be all around a good colleague to have. And remember your audience, you're trying to convince people who don't know what you're talking about why you spent 2 years or whatever it is you spent on doing this research project. Why did you waste all this time on that?
Why?
So related to that, I've seen a lot of suggestions of go into a department and do research for who you might want to talk about collaborating with. And, you know, obvious exceptions to the contrary, I don't always see very predominant collaborations between people in the same department as ubiquitously as would be suggested by that recommendation. So can any of you sort of elucidate what it is that's trying to really pull out? I assume it was like a shorthand way of showing interest in your potential colleagues. But it seems like that advice I can't quite figure out.
Okay, so I'll make it concrete to Central. So our department has people doing lots of very, very different things, a lot of versatility going on, and there's probably a web presence somewhere about digital humanities, probably a web presence somewhere in the university about service learning. You might say, I'm interested in service learning courses. Can you tell me who in the department is doing those right now, and what that looks like here? You know, it's a way for, like you said, to show interest in collegial relationships, and show interest in whatever the mission is of that department. In our case, it's
I would say that, oh, sorry.
Okay, good.
I would say that I will agree with that 100%, but I think it's important to also look interdisciplinary. The people that I collaborate the most are not in my department. I collaborate a lot with history and religion, and actually have a book project with a colleague from religion. And so maybe your best collaborators are not going to be in the department, and that's okay. You know, to establish contacts and to do projects across disciplines is really valued, at least in my institution.
Is it valued at the interview stage though?
To be able to make connections, yeah. And to be able to see places where you will fit, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, this is again where your research about the particular institution and department. Do you see any evidence on the website that people co-teach courses? Do you see any evidence in people's CVs that they are publishing together? If not, then maybe that's irrelevant for that particular job, but that doesn't preclude you expressing interest in interdisciplinary work in the institution and finding out what interdisciplinary groups exist. Or what kinds of programming the department has put on for students or lecture series or whatever, and say, I would love to participate in the kinds of things that the department's been doing.
So, I think that what you shouldn't be looking for someone, you shouldn't be thinking of as immediately finding a co-author but someone who you can talk about your work with.
Yeah.
And who would be interested in perhaps reading your papers, you might be interested in reading them. And so you could interact with at a deeper level than you would over lunch, right? That's what I think you can look for. And, you know, if it happens to lead, I mean, who the heck knew that I was maybe still working with Dave Brody 50 years later.
Right.
But, you know, so you never know that that's going to happen, but that there's somebody who you can bounce ideas off of.
That I think might be the key, right, is that this question of who can you collaborate with is really who will you provide a service to for reading papers and vice versa, right? How can you contribute that way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because chances are you're going to be the only one in your discipline, right? I'm the only one who does Spanish and Golden Age literature. And so my real, you know, the people who do the same thing are in all institutions, right? I build those connections over years, but they're not in the school. And so you need to find somebody that you can, you know, have coffee with and say, hey, how's your paper moving along? This has some suggestions. So I saw this might be interesting to you, you know, something like that.
I want to make sure that we come back to Collie to talk about the campus interview at North Carolina Central University. I think we lost track of her in this question.
That is at the whims of each new committee, and I've seen it operate just a job talk. I've seen it operate just a teaching demo. I've seen it operate both ways. When I was interviewed, this was more than 10 years ago, I noticed the schedule and I saw I'm not going to get a chance to meet with students. That seems odd to me at a teaching institution. So I did reach out to the chair and to say, would it be possible for me to meet with some students? And they accommodated that, and to me that seemed absolutely critical, and it helped me make a decision.
Panel, I think we've kind of covered some of the questions, so I'm going to jump ahead to about question number 8, just for those of you who kind of made some notes around these questions. And this is kind of around the issue of the schedule of the campus visit, which necessarily involves meetings with the search committee, meetings with the individual deans and faculty members, and yet there are also these times, sometimes with the very same people that you're meeting in other contexts, to do lunch and dinner and breakfast, and someone picks you up from the airport. So what is supposed to happen, and how are those conversations supposed to be different in those different contexts? What should you be talking about on the ride from the airport that's different from in the search committee meeting? Help us with some guidance here, and I'll start with Linda.
Well, first of all, I do think it's true that the entire campus visit you are on. But that being said, you're also a human being, and we're human beings, and just some, you know, conversation. It doesn't have to be constantly selling yourself and selling your case. It's fine to just kind of, you know, see where the conversation goes. It's great to ask about that, you know, more things about the university, life in town, issues. in my case, when I was interviewed at UNCG, I knew it was very important to let the committee know just how much I wanted to stay in the area. That was not something I could put on in my letter, but once I was in the campus interview, I could just talk about, and things that they were not allowed to ask me. Yeah, I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, and they don't really move right now. I'd already made the case about how excited I was about the department and the job, but in the informal conversations, so when the question comes up, you know, as the entire department deliberates, and it usually is the entire department, yeah, but could we get this person? Yeah, in fact, this person told me when I was driving her around town. So it's some balance of things. You do want to continue to sell yourself. You don't want to reveal or, you know, or ask questions that are inappropriate. I think one of the other questions here is, what do you do with inappropriate questions? I think most of us in our lives have been in situations where we've been asked inappropriate questions. So if that comes up, what do you feel comfortable doing? How do you usually handle them? Obviously, you shouldn't be rude, but it's fine to just say, excuse me. Or I guarantee if you're asked an inappropriate, you know, nicely with a smile, but also if you're asked an inappropriate question in front of any other member of the department, they're going to be cringing. And if you just take a moment and don't respond, that person will jump in. So try to have fun.
Yeah, so remember, the department is trying to sell you on living in this place too. So it's perfectly okay to ask questions about, you know, what are the highlights, you know, is there a good restaurant scene, you know, the school's nice, you know, those, you know, what kinds of activities do people engage in around here. Those are perfectly good things, fine things to ask about, and people will generally be really trying, if you're one of the last three, to say, you know, when we make you an offer, we want you to be able to say yes, right? And so what all goes into that is not just professional. Every time, I mean, with every person you meet that's involved in the decision, you should remember you should lead with professionalism and professional considerations. But if you have a couple, often you'll go to dinner with people you've already met or something like that, and that's a really good time to sort of talk about what's life like, and that's okay, that's good.
Having done this process a few times, can you give any pointers or say a bit about that final conversation with usually the search committee chair, where they talk about next steps, possibly disclose the salary range, how best students can remain professional, and what they can and can't say in those meetings?
Sure. Yes. It should be the last. With us, it's almost. Well, when I was chair, it was always the chair,
Yes,
who did it. And this was the time that you could talk about, you know, specifics about salaries. You know, what are your promotion and tenure standards? You know, how do I find out about benefits? You don't have to be told about it, but you need to be able to find out about it so you get the offer. You can be able to evaluate them. You know, you don't be looking for a specific thing, but try to be able to get them to talk about what is inherent in this. That's the one time when it's really okay to talk about benefits and, you know, those sorts of things. You know, I've had offers at places that were, what should we say, a tad more expensive than here, and so, you know, how do you negotiate living expenses and buy a house? And the answer was you don't, but that's beside the point. And those sorts of things, but only that person at the end, and you should feel free to be pretty straightforward on that. Especially if you have particular needs, if you have a particular need child, if you have whatever, you know, later on, you may have kids that are reaching college age. Is there any kind of benefit associated with that. Those are perfectly fine, but only in that one instance.
It's
And
also
actually-
the family friendly and the two-body problem, at least in
Yeah.
our institution, that's when you'd ask all those
Well,
questions.
I think one reason I bring it up is I have found it in the past, a very delicate conversation, because you're getting these, the job seems so within reach often, but it's not an offer, right? And so they're actually saying, they might even say, oh, you finally get to know what the salary range for the position is, oh, they're gonna pay me, but you can't negotiate in that meeting until you have an
Right.
offer. I wanna make sure people know that.
Yeah.
Because I think
Yes.
it's easy
Yes, that's right, yeah.
it's easy to misstep in that conversation.
Yeah, and it may be, it very well, the chair doesn't know what salary offer will be allowed to be
Yeah.
Yeah.
at that meeting.
Interesting, yeah.
No, that'd go to I would have to go to the dean
Yeah.
and
Right.
negotiate that. There's a sort of standard, but, a place like Duke, there's a variable standard, shall we say.
Yeah.
So sorry, most on-campus visits in with that, or include that, like this chair kind of?
Yeah, it's a sort of the wrap-up meeting where they talk about the timetable, they will, again, it is variable. I know in my experience, I actually have been in situations where they've said, we're gonna offer a range, or I've even given a number, and the green behind the ears mistake I made initially was to show surprise. When I heard, oh, really? That, you can't do that. But I think I guess the advice I would give is just, it's not an offer yet, you're not negotiating yet, smile and nod if you can think of nothing else to say, and hopefully they'll call you in 2 weeks. But yeah, it's not the time for negotiating.
Right. It is a time for, learning.
Yes, learning.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
also
but
for them
if
to
they
learn
do take a
new
salary,
things.
don't say, oh, look at the time.
I want to make sure all of our panelists had a chance to answer. I think, we got kind of maybe cut off mid-question. Is there anything, Holly or Mina, that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I want to talk about this delicacy. If you've got a special situation that actually is make or break for you. I do think that the campus interview time, like when you come out, for example, if it's important to you to live in a community where it's okay to be queer, right? So for me, I thought about this and I asked my advisor about this, and then when I was invited to campuses, I made a decision beforehand that at some point during the campus visit, I would approach somebody who seemed approachable and say, what is it like to, for gay people here? And actually before some of the visits, when I was on a good terms with the chair, I'd say, would it be possible for me to meet with somebody who could answer a question about what it's like for gay faculty here? But that was a risky position to take, and I don't really advise it if you feel like making that risk, and it's the kind of situation you're in. But for me, for my family, it was make or break. Are we going to live in this community? Then we have to be able to live in this community. And so I needed honest answers, and I needed the committee to be able to be prepared to give me thorough answers, right? So that was a decision. But you're always kind of balancing what's going to filter you out, what's going to make them uncomfortable,
If there is if you do have some special consideration, I think of this especially with children with special needs. You may want to make sure that the chair knows that before going in to negotiate with the dean. So that can be on the table, and they may be able to make some special accommodation that make it more attractive for you in a way they wouldn't think of if they didn't know that it was on there. Some things are uncomfortable, some things are difficult to, and you don't want to do anything that says, oh, this is going to reduce the probability. So I understand all that, but sort of towards the end, you've got to make sure that they can make you an offer that you can accept.
Because we can't ask those questions.
Right,
So if these are
exactly.
important questions to you, you have to open the door, right?
Yeah.
And that's the little
We're not
balance.
allowed.
But we want to know because we want to provide you with the resources. Yes, here are some great resources for families. Here's LGBTQ resources, and here's the racial dynamic. We want to know these things and help you.
Other questions from the audience?
Can I ask, in that stage too, do you recommend mentioning if you have a partner who's also on the job market, like in the academic world, or is that like, no, wait till you've had an offer and then you can mention or bring that up?
In our department, that would be an appropriate thing to discuss with the department head, maybe with the dean.
Yeah.
But not before, not with faculty, because we can't, you can mention you have a partner, but we can't do anything.
Yeah.
The department head or the dean would be.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be the first person to have such a circumstance. That-
Yeah.
So, yeah. It may be hard to figure out how to make it a comfortable raise up, but it's actually ordinary.
Okay.
Yeah, we have.
What about if you have children? Would it be okay to kind of bring that up and see what how like family culture is received in university culture? Could you bring that up like during some of the informal conversations with?
Yeah.
Great dinner table conversation. It might, you want to be sensitive to how many people at the table have children, but
Right.
absolutely, absolutely. What are the schools like? What are the neighborhoods like? How flexible is the policy?
Again, something else that we cannot ask
We
you,
cannot ask you.
so you have to open the door.
I see. So by
Yeah, we
volunteering
cannot ask
and-
You cannot ask if you have children, if you're planning to have children or nothing.
Right.
But we have lots of information we could share in any one of a
Right.
number of situations, if you
Right.
will let us know that they are of interest to you.
Exactly.
I'm curious about kind of the rhythm of the interview. When we were talking earlier about, maybe Skype interviews, you have like an 8-hour block, maybe you're tired or fatigued, exhausted at that time. If you're asked a question, you have a range of like how long you'll talk about that, or also kind of like maybe a shorter answer that feels out where you want to go, where the committee wants to go, and then expand where they go. Just in terms of that dynamic, what type of advice may you have? I don't know if there's specific advice, like you shouldn't go beyond 2-minute answer or something like that, or just anything that you may have to say.
Leave
So I
us
would-
wanting more?
Yeah.
Pause so we can ask follow-up questions, say, I'm happy to talk more about
Yeah.
this. If you're in a face-to-face situation, you can judge by eye contact and body language.
Yeah, so the second, because it is bounded in time, effectively, you maybe want to be a little bit more careful, but, the closer it is to asking a question about your scholarship or your teaching, the longer you have to answer. Questions that are about, are there other courses you've thought about? Short answers, but there, and they can have a follow-up question. On the half-hour things, I discovered that if I asked, when I'm being interviewed, if I asked a faculty member about their research, that usually took the whole half hour and I was free.
You were done, yeah.
Well, let me ask a question here that again is asking for some insight behind the scenes, and that is, now you've brought your 3 top candidates on site, you're meeting as a faculty to discuss those candidates. Can you give us some insight in a way that can be, publicly shared into what are the things that you're considering? What criteria are you weighing in that decision in terms of ranking folks, and who's going to get the offer?
We frequently wish we could hire all.
Yeah. I would say fit within the department. I would say collegiality. How you are perceived, you can get along with people, in a social way too. Potential growth, potential ways to contribute to the department, to the school. In my, at Elon, we have, after all 3 leave, or all 4 leave, we have a meeting for the search committee. And the search committee does a recommendation to the department. And then when we bring the recommendation to the department, then there is a discussion. But the first discussion doesn't happen at the department level, it happens at the committee level. And so we will write a document saying why we think this person is the one that we recommend, right? And based on that, we start the conversation with the department. And then the whole department votes, and then that goes to the dean.
The interactions, so at the job talk, the faculty in our department have a form that they can complete that helps the committee create the report for the dean. And those comments that come through on that and the scores on that have a lot of weight. So so the interactions, and it's not just about the job talk, if people's had a chance to interact outside of the job talk, that's also incorporated. So those interactions that you have with the broader faculty of the department really do help people get an impression of what you have to offer this department at this time. And they will respond with great frankness about their perception of that. And so we bring that all together, and kind of the chair of the committee has to craft a report for the meeting.
Does your department vote, or is it the committee? Not trying to get into sticky areas. Our department votes, but not all departments do. In some places, it's the committee, and some places, it's the department, and some places, it's the dean.
It's the
design
dean
right now.
for us.
Yeah, I forgot to say that
So
that the demo, the teaching demo, and the job talk, and all the other interactions, lunches, and things like that have an evaluation form with them. And so we collect all of that as part of the feedback from all of these groups of people who have interacted with the candidate as well.
So ours also goes with a lot of feedback from the rest of the department to the committee as they formulate their position. The place where there's a disjuncture, if there is going to be one, there may not be one, quite often there isn't, but if there is going to be one, it's that the committee has generally read as broadly across whatever the file contains as anybody, whereas most people in the department had a half an hour, may have looked at the job talk paper and went to the job talk and heard the questions and answers, the answers from the person. And that's a slice. And the whole versus the slice is where the problems sometimes arise. If you're, quite often they go together, of course, but that's where the problem is. So if the committee is trying to get somebody who seems to have a whole lot of interests, whereas some people think that something went wrong in the job talk. And there's quite often substantial disagreement among the faculty about that. That's where the difficulty comes. So that's just something to keep in mind. And to the extent that's possible, the thing you, in a sense, have control over, but in a sense don't, the responses to questions at the job talk often looms very large in individual faculty minds, above and beyond the committee. It seems to give a different measure. I mean, they could have read the job talk. If you're giving a job talk paper, it's a paper, and you gave it, and you either said the words on it or didn't. But how you respond to questioning gives them some sense of the character of your mind. And it's almost impossible to prepare for it other than giving lots of practice job talks to different groups, if you can, different subsets of their fellow graduate students, faculty, whatever.
The evaluation forms, as you mentioned, it's only for faculty. They don't generally have students or graduate students.
We have all kinds of students.
Your students.
We are very interested in what our graduate students have to say. because we have 2 master's programs and a PhD program. We're absolutely interested in how that said, our graduate students are gonna leave, we're there, and we want a colleague long-term, so.
And that's formally on paper, just like the faculty, not just oral word of mouth.
So, yeah, so for us, the graduate students meet separately with the interviewee, write a report, and then they come to the faculty meeting, and that's the first order of business. They present, and we could in principle ask questions to elaborate on what they're, and then the faculty takes off from there. So the graduate students play a very large role, and if there's any particular reason for involving undergraduates in it, which is relatively rare for an R1, but sometimes happens. We have a program, PPE, Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. We sometimes hire in that, and that's an undergraduate program, and so they'll also have a report. They probably won't come to the faculty meeting, that's licensed. Scare the crap out of them.
UNCG had some issues with undergraduates asking inappropriate questions, not in our department, so that was nixed. That was nixed. That had nothing to do with our department.
But for us, the total faculty, and it's run by the chair. The committee chair supposedly is in charge, but really the department chair is really if there's any problems, it's up to that person to try to negotiate what works.
I did want to sort of add one thing here. I think one of the shockers for me as I transitioned, it's been a while now, but from graduate student to faculty, is to realize search committees don't have a lot of power. Search committees are overworked faculty who have agreed to do this service or have been asked to do this service. And we do our jobs very professionally, and my colleagues read every single application with great concern, but it's the department head and the dean who have the negotiating power. And I think in most cases, most search committee chairs don't have a lot of power. Our job is to kind of make sure everything flows well and, everything is organized.
Well, today has been just a really comprehensive look behind the scenes at the interview process. And before I wrap us up formally, I want to note that there's one more panel in this series on pursuing the faculty position in the Humanities and Social Sciences coming up on October 29th, 3 to 4:30 in this room, and that is about negotiating the offer. So we're going to hear, I think, the conclusion now, the thrilling conclusion to this conversation and in that series. Would you all please join me in thanking our panelists for joining us today? And we want to